My name is Robert Miller, and this is the story of how my own son locked me in a bathroom for 2 days, and how I walked away from everything to take my life back. It's a true story about family betrayal, father's revenge, and the painful truth that sometimes the people you love the most can hurt you the deepest. I never thought something like this could happen in America, in my own home, in a quiet suburban neighborhood where people wave to each other from their driveways and kids play catch on the street. From the outside, we look like a normal American family. But behind closed doors, something inside my son, Ethan, had changed. After my wife passed away, I raised Ethan alone. He was just 8 years old when cancer took her from us. I promised myself I would give that boy everything: love, security, and a future brighter than mine ever was. I worked double shifts as a mechanic and cleaned offices at night just to pay his tuition. I skipped meals so he could eat 3 times a day. Every birthday, I made him a cake, even if all I could afford were eggs, flour, and prayers. I thought that's what a good father did. I thought sacrifice built loyalty. I thought love built respect. But I was wrong. Years later, when he married his college sweetheart, I gave him the house, the one I had spent half my life paying for. I told him it was his now, so he could start his family without worry. I didn't mention that the house deed was still under my name. I never thought I'd need that protection. For a while, things were peaceful. I moved into the small guest room, cooked my own meals, and tried not to interfere in their lives. But over time, Ethan's tone changed. He stopped calling me Dad with warmth. His wife started treating me like a guest in my own home. Little did I know, those small moments of disrespect were just the beginning, the first cracks before everything came crashing down. Because one cold evening, something would happen that would destroy everything I believed about love, family, and forgiveness. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about family betrayal. It starts slow, like rust on metal. You don't notice the damage until it's too late. At first, I thought Ethan was just tired from work. He had a new job in the city, a mortgage to worry about, and a wife who loved nice things. I understood pressure. I'd lived my whole life under it. But little by little, I realized this wasn't stress. It was something colder. The first signs came in tiny, hurtful ways. He'd make comment about my habits. Dad, the TV's too loud, or you use too much milk. Small things, right? But the tone wasn't love anymore. It was irritation, like I was some burden taking up space in what used to be my house. I brushed it off, told myself all families have tension. I even tried hard to stay out of the way, cooked when they weren't home, did my laundry at night, and kept my room spotless. But instead of peace, I got silence. That heavy, uncomfortable silence that fills a room when people wish you weren't there. His wife, Lena, barely spoke to me. She'd whisper to Ethan behind closed doors, and they both stopped talking when I entered the room. Once I heard her say, "He still acts like this house is his." And Ethan didn't correct her. That one sentence hit harder than any argument could. I gave my son everything, my years, my money, my heart, and somehow I had become an unwanted guest in my own home. But what hurt most wasn't the words. It was the looks. That cold glance from a child you raised. A glance that says, "You're in the way." I tried to remember the little boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street. The one who used to fall asleep on my shoulder after a long day. But that boy was gone. In his place was a man who looked at me like I was a problem to solve, not a father to love. That's when I began to feel something I hadn't felt before, a quiet fear. Not fear of him, but fear of how far this change could go. And soon, I'd find out just how far it could. The hardest thing about living in the same house with someone who stopped loving you is pretending you don't notice. Every morning I'd wake up in that small guest room. The same house I'd built brick by brick. The same place where Ethan took his first steps. And it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like I was renting space in my own life. One evening, I was fixing the garden fence, something I'd done for years. The wood was old, weathered from too many winters. I thought maybe I'd surprise Ethan, make the place look nice for him and his wife. But when he came outside, instead of saying, "Thanks, Dad," he snapped, "Why are you making noise right now? I'm trying to relax." That was the first time he spoke to me like that. Sharp, cold, like I was a stranger who owed him silence. I stood there, hammer in hand, staring at the son I'd sacrificed everything for, and all I could say was, "Sorry, son." He walked away without a word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed thinking about everything. The double shifts, the late nights, the birthday cakes I'd baked when I could barely afford flour. I thought about the years I spent building a future for him, one he now used to push me aside. I realized something then. I had made his life too easy. He never had to struggle the way I did. He never knew what it meant to choose between dinner and rent. Maybe that's why he didn't value anything. Not money, not sacrifice, not me. The next few weeks only got worse. He started controlling things around the house. The thermostat, the lights, even the water heater. "You're wasting electricity," he'd say. "Don't take long showers. The bills are high." The words didn't hurt as much as the way he said them. Each time, his tone chipped away at the last pieces of respect between us. I told myself he was just stressed, but deep down I knew better. This wasn't just tension. It was resentment, growing quietly like a crack in the foundation. And cracks, if you ignore them long enough, always destroy the house. There's a silence in some houses that feels alive, like it's watching you. That's what my home had become. The walls I once painted with laughter now whispered things I wasn't meant to hear. At first, it was little moments. I'd walk into the kitchen, and the conversation would stop. Drawers would close quickly. Footsteps would shift. You don't need to hear the words to know when you're being talked about. Silence tells you everything. One evening, as I was making tea, I heard them in the next room. Ethan and his wife, Lena. Their voices were low, but the words carried clear enough through the air vent. "He doesn't know how to live in a modern house," Lena said. "I know," Ethan replied, laughing softly. "It's like he still thinks this place belongs to him." That line hit me like a knife in the chest. Still thinks this place belongs to him. I gripped the counter so hard my hands shook. I wanted to walk in there, look my son in the eye, and remind him whose name was on the deed. But I didn't. I swallowed my pride and stayed quiet, the same way I had all my life when things got hard. I told myself it wasn't worth starting a fight, that maybe if I stayed patient, things would go back to normal. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't. Something sacred between us had cracked. From then on, every day felt heavier. When I sat at the dinner table, they'd bring their plates to the living room. When I tried to help with chores, they told me not to mess up their system. I'd walk into the living room and see the TV volume drop. They didn't even want to share sound with me anymore. It's strange how family rejection doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it comes dressed in quiet exclusion. I try to keep busy, fixing things around the house, mowing the lawn, washing dishes. But every act of kindness made them colder. If I cleaned, I did it wrong. If I cooked, I used too much oil. No matter what I did, I was the problem. And one night, as I sat in my small room staring at the ceiling, I realized something that made my stomach twist. I was living like a prisoner, in the home I built with my own hands. They say every storm gives warnings before it hits. Small rumbles in the distance, a change in the air. Looking back now, I can see every sign that a storm was coming. I just didn't want to believe it would come from my own son. The tension in the house had turned thick enough to choke on. Ethan barely looked at me anymore. When he did, it was with that expression, the one that says, "Why are you still here?" I kept telling myself he'd cool down, that maybe work stress or money issues were making him lash out. But it wasn't that. It was something darker, resentment. One afternoon, I was fixing a broken hinge on the kitchen cabinet. It was a small job, something I'd done hundreds of times before. But when Ethan came home and saw me there, his face tightened. "Why do you keep touching things?" he snapped. "You always make a mess." I froze. The screwdriver slipped from my hand and clattered onto the floor. I wanted to explain, to remind him I'd built most of the house's furniture with these same hands. But I didn't. I just nodded and stepped aside. That night, I heard him talking to Lena. His voice wasn't angry. It was casual, careless. "Once Dad's out, we can finally renovate this place," he said. Once I'm out. Not once I move. Not once I pass. Just out. He talked about me like I was a piece of old furniture taking up space. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my chair, staring at the floor, feeling something inside me slowly breaking. Not from anger, from realization. The man I'd sacrificed everything for had already decided I didn't belong. The next morning, I woke up to find the thermostat turned down to 60. The water heater was off. The hallway light I used for safety at night switched off again. Every small control, every flick of a switch, was his quiet way of reminding me who had power now. I told myself I could endure it, that I'd survived worse. But when you live long enough under someone else's rules, in silence, in coldness, something inside you eventually snaps. And for me, that breaking point came one cold evening, in a locked bathroom. It was one of those bitterly cold evenings in late January, the kind that makes your bones ache and the whole house feel hollow. I had spent most of the day outside fixing a section of the backyard fence that had blown loose during a storm. My knees hurt, my back throbbed, and all I wanted was a few quiet minutes under a hot shower to ease the pain. I turned on the water and let the steam fill the bathroom. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. The sound of the water was like a blanket, soft, steady, peaceful. I closed my eyes, trying to forget that this house no longer felt like home. Then I heard it, a fist pounding on the bathroom door. How long are you going to be in there? Ethan's voice cut through the sound of the water. You're wasting all the hot water again. At first, I thought he was joking, but his tone was different this time. Sharp, angry, impatient. I'll be out in a minute, I called, trying to keep my voice steady. You always say that, he shouted back. You think I made him money? You have no respect for other people in this house. I froze. My son's voice, the same one that used to ask me for bedtime stories, now dripped with pure contempt. Before I could respond, I heard the unmistakable click of the lock from the outside. My heart dropped. Ethan, I said, knocking on the door. What are you doing? No answer. I knocked harder. This isn't funny. Still nothing. Then footsteps. Fading away. That's when it hit me. He had locked me in. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the door, waiting for it to open again. It didn't. I tried the handle again and again, but it was no use. The lock held firm. Minutes turned to hours. The steam faded. The air turned cold. I sat on the edge of the tub, wrapped in a towel, staring at the tile floor beneath my feet. From the other side of the door, I could hear faint laughter, Ethan and Lena's laughter, drifting to the walls while I sat trapped and alone. That sound would haunt me for the rest of my life. The first few hours, I told myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe he was angry and wanted to make a point. Maybe he'd cool down, come back, and unlock the door. That's what fathers do, right? We give our children the benefit of the doubt, even when they don't deserve it. But as the night dragged on, that hope began to die. The bathroom floor was freezing. I sat there in silence, wrapped in a damp towel, the tiles pressing into my back. The only sound was the dripping faucet. No food, no chair, just me and the hollow echo of my son's laughter somewhere beyond the door. At one point, I called out to him, Ethan, please, just let me out. No answer, only muffled voices and the faint clinking of plates. Dinner. They were having dinner while I was locked in a bathroom like an unwanted animal. Hours turned to what felt like days. I tried to sleep, but the cold kept biting through my bones. My stomach growled. My throat was dry, so I drank from the tap. It tasted metallic, bitter. I tried not to think about how far I had fallen. From a father who built a home, to a man who couldn't even open his own bathroom door. The next morning came quietly, no light through a window, no clock to tell me time. Just the distant hum of life, continuing without me. I heard the TV, the sound of dishes being washed. Then laughter again, not the kind that comes from joy, but from comfort. They were comfortable while I sat in misery. That was when the humiliation turned to something else, clarity. I realized this wasn't about hot water. It was about control, about a son who wanted to make me small enough to fit in the background of his life. By the second night, My body ached from lying on the hard floor. My head spun from hunger. I stopped talking, stopped begging. I just sat in silence, staring at that locked door, and something inside me shifted. The love that once defined me as a father turned cold, and in that coldness, a new kind of strength was born. The kind that doesn't yell, doesn't plead, but waits. Because when that door finally opened, I wasn't going to be the same man anymore. When the door finally opened, there was no dramatic moment, no apology, no sense of guilt. It just clicked. I remember the sound clearly, that small metallic twist breaking 2 days of silence. For a second, I thought I had imagined it. Then the door creaked open, and there he was, Ethan, standing in the hallway, coffee in hand, like nothing had happened. "Don't waste water again," he muttered, without even looking at me. And then he walked away. That was it. No remorse. No shame. Just words cold enough to freeze the air between us. I stepped out slowly, my legs shaking from exhaustion. The hallway light hit my eyes like a blade. My head pounded, my mouth dry, my stomach twisted in knots. I wanted to shout. I wanted to ask him why. But I didn't, because in that silence, I finally understood something about toxic family dynamics that I had ignored all my life. Not every wound bleeds. Some just scar the soul. I walked to my room, closed the door quietly, and sat on the edge of my bed. The same bed I had slept in for years. The same room where I had dreamed of growing old, surrounded by family. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a cage that someone else owned. For hours, I sat there in the stillness, listening to their laughter drifting down the hallway again. But it didn't sting this time. It fueled something else, resolve. I realized then that my silence could be my weapon. Shouting would give him power. Revenge would give me peace. I didn't move for the rest of the day. I just thought about the house, the years, the sacrifices, and the deed still resting quietly in my safe. The papers with my name printed in bold letters. By the time the sun went down, I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to fight. I was going to end this story in a way he'd never see coming. He thought he had locked me in a bathroom, but he had actually unlocked something far stronger, a father who had nothing left to lose. The first step in any good plan is silence. I sat on that bed and listened, not to their voices, but to the rhythm of the house, the small sounds that tell you who belongs and who doesn't. Every squeak in the stair, every hum of the refrigerator, every distant laugh became a clue. I learned their schedule without them knowing. When they left for work, when the neighbors walked their dogs, when Lena did grocery runs and Ethan stayed late in the city. Routine is a weakness. Routine is power. I would use it. I thought of the deed in my safe. My name printed in black ink. The single paper that could end his certainty. That piece of paper wasn't just a legal instrument. It was proof. Proof that I hadn't given away my life to become invisible. Proof that the house, the mortgage, the roof over their heads had been mine first. If he truly believed the world revolved around him, then his center would shatter the moment he noticed he'd been living on borrowed time. But I didn't want a spectacle. I didn't want a courtroom fight or an argument in front of neighbors. I wanted a clean, quiet resolution that would leave no room for bargaining and no place for his excuses. So I started small and invisible. I made calls late at night when the house was asleep. I met with my lawyer in a dim office and explained the entire thing. The ownership, the private sale possibility, the buyer who would pay cash and move fast. The lawyer listened without surprise. Lawyers deal in facts. Facts didn't care about sentiment. During the day, I performed my role as a patient old man. I smiled when he passed me in the hallway. I answered his short grunts. I watered the plants and read the newspaper like nothing had changed. If he suspected anything, he showed no sign of it. That arrogance, his certainty that the house was his, made it easier. Over dinners, I kept my voice low when he bragged about future renovations. He spoke of ripping down walls and buying new furniture. He didn't know that in 3 weeks the walls would hold strangers instead. I set up a separate bank account under my name. I arranged the buyers to my lawyer. No public listings, no open houses. No for sale sign to warn him. I watched online travel articles about small coastal towns where I might disappear afterward, planning a quiet life full of simple pleasures. Long walks on a beach, small breakfasts in a sunlit cafe. The kind of freedom I sacrificed as a promise but never delivered. It felt strange, planning revenge like a business transaction. But this was more than revenge. It was reclamation. Every detail I arranged was a seal being slowly put on a chapter of my life. I had been patient for decades. Now my patience was the engine of the plan. And when the legal papers were signed, silence would do the rest. By the time the sale paperwork was ready, the plan felt less like revenge and more like an inevitability. The natural conclusion of years of being taken for granted. I moved through those last days like a ghost of my own life, performing small routines that would keep suspicion asleep, while everything else quietly shifted beneath the surface. It's funny how ordinary actions look harmless. Making tea, sweeping the porch, humming an old song while I sorted my papers. But each small step was part of a larger, deliberate move toward freedom. The lawyer handled the closing with professional efficiency. There was no courtroom drama, no shoved confrontation, only signatures on crisp legal pages that confirmed what the deed had always said. The house belonged to me. We arranged a private sale. Cash, quick settlement, no public listing. The buyers were a young couple, enthusiastic and ready to move in. They asked no questions about the family who'd lived there for years. They were focused on future plans, remodeling ideas, and paint swatches. That was how it should be. The new owners would bring laughter and life back into rooms that had become quiet with contempt. I remember the last week like a sequence of still frames. I'd packed one small suitcase, passport, a few shirts, the watch my wife gave me years ago, and the deed's photocopy tucked safely inside a thin leather folder. I withdrew modest amounts of cash over several days so that no one would notice sudden large withdrawals. I moved the safe's key to a new hiding place only I knew. I called the travel agent late at night and booked a one-way ticket to a coastal town where the air smelled of salt and the people didn't know my name or my history. During those days, Ethan never suspected. He went on planning renovations, naming colors for cabinets, laughing about weekend barbecues. He bragged about our future in a tone of entitlement that used to make me smile. Now it sounded like a verdict. Lena pinned magazines to a board and discussed appliances as if the house was already hers by right. They treated the future as a script they'd written without asking permission. On the morning I left, I walked to the house at dawn while the world was still wrapped in mist. I touched the banister, the kitchen counter, the place where my wife had planted a small rose bush, not to mourn, but to close a chapter. I slid the house keys into an envelope from my lawyer. I didn't leave a note. There was no dramatic scene, no last words. I opened the front door, took a deep breath of cold morning air, and stepped into a life I'd finally chosen for myself. When the movers and the new owners arrived that afternoon, Ethan's stunned face as he realized what had happened would be his burden to carry. I left the certainty he had in me on the doorstep and walked away with my dignity intact. The circle was closing, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt like my own. The morning I vanished, the world was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels sacred, like life itself is holding its breath. I woke before the sun. The air in my room was cold, still. My small suitcase sat by the door, perfectly packed. Inside were only the essentials, a few clothes, my passport, the cash I had withdrawn, and my wife's watch, the only piece of love I had left that hadn't turned bitter. For a long moment, I just sat there, listening to the faint hum of the house. Somewhere down the hall, Ethan and Lena slept soundly, completely unaware that by the time they woke up, their world would no longer belong to them. I moved slowly, deliberately. Every sound, every creak of the floor, every turn of the doorknob felt like it echoed through my chest. I didn't want to wake them. I didn't want words, not even anger. Words are for people who still hope to be understood. I was past that. I left the house keys in an envelope on the kitchen counter, addressed to my lawyer. The sale had been finalized the previous afternoon. Legally, the property no longer belonged to me or to Ethan. It belonged to the new owners who would arrive later that day. The money was already wired to my private account overseas. Before stepping outside, I turned around one last time. The house looked different in the dawn light. The walls that once carried my laughter and my son's first words now stood empty, indifferent. I thought I'd feel sadness, but I didn't. What I felt was release, a quiet kind of peace that only comes after years of being silenced. When I stepped outside, the cold air stung my face, sharp and clean. A taxi waited a few houses away, its headlights cutting through the morning mist. The driver nodded as I approached, loading my single bag into the trunk. I didn't look back when the car started moving. As we turned the corner, I caught one last glimpse of the house through the side mirror, the place where I had built a life, endured humiliation, and found my breaking point. I whispered to myself, "It's not my home anymore." By the time the sun rose, I was already on the highway to the airport, leaving behind the walls that once trapped me and the people who taught me what freedom truly means. By the time the plane lifted off the runway, my old life was already unraveling. I watched the city shrink below me, a blur of rooftops, highways, and memories I didn't want anymore. Somewhere down there, my son was still asleep, completely unaware that the foundation of his comfort was gone. I imagined the scene unfolding exactly as I knew it would. Ethan would wake up late, groggy and careless, expecting another ordinary morning. He'd wander into the kitchen, reach for the coffee pot, and maybe call out for me, not out of love, but habit. But instead of smelling breakfast or hearing the clink of my mug, he'd see the envelope on the counter. Before he could even open it, the doorbell would ring. The new owners, a young couple, would be standing there with moving boxes, a moving truck idling in the driveway. They'd smile politely and say, "We're the new homeowners. The sale went through last week." I could almost see his face. The confusion first, then disbelief, then the color draining as realization sank in. His hands would tighten on the edge of the counter, his voice cracking as he demanded answers. But there would be no one left to answer him. He'd rush to my room, searching for me for something, anything, that proved it wasn't true. But the drawers would be empty, the closet bare, the safe gone, my presence erased completely, like I'd never existed in that house at all. Then the panic would come, the calls, the shouting, the anger. He'd dial my number over and over, only to hear it ring into silence. He'd call the lawyer, and the lawyer would confirm what I wanted him to. The sale was legal, Mr. Miller. The house was in your father's name. There's nothing you can do. Nothing. That word would echo louder than any I'd ever spoken to him. I didn't need to see it to know. I could feel the weight of it as the plane cut through the clouds. The instant his arrogance collapsed, the moment he realized that everything he had built was standing on a lie. He had locked me in a bathroom for using too much hot water. I had locked him out of life he thought he owned. By the time his world caught fire, mine was already free. They say revenge tastes sweet, but the truth is, it tastes like silence. Cold, still, and final. By the time Ethan discovered the truth, I was thousands of miles away, sitting by a window seat watching clouds drift like slow-moving mountains. My phone stayed off. I didn't need to hear his voice to know what it would sound like. I could imagine it perfectly. At first, there'd be denial. There must be a mistake, he'd tell himself. Then confusion, his voice rising, demanding answers from a moving crew, from the new owners, from anyone who'd listen. And when the lawyer's calm voice confirmed the truth, that's when the panic would start to creep in. That tightness in his chest, that loss of control he'd once used to humiliate me. It would finally turn on him. I pictured him running room to room, opening closets that no longer held my things. His wife, Lena, would be standing there too, her face red with anger and disbelief. I could almost hear her shouting, "You said the house was yours, Ethan." And he'd have no answer, no excuses, just silence and shame. They'd be forced to pack what little they owned, shoving their expensive dreams into cardboard boxes. I imagined Lena blaming him for everything, her voice sharp as broken glass. And him finally understanding what real powerlessness feels like, the kind I'd felt when he turned that bathroom lock. It wasn't satisfaction that filled me as I thought of it. It was justice. Quiet, poetic, unspoken justice. I didn't need to see him suffer. I just needed him to understand what he had done. Some people learn through love. Others only learn through loss. As the plane began its descent hours later, I looked down at the coastline of my new home. The ocean glimmered in the distance, endless and calm. I smiled faintly, not because I was happy, but because I was free. For the first time in decades, I wasn't defined by my sacrifices or my son's shadow. Ethan had taken my dignity once. I had taken back my life. And now, he'd spend his days wondering how the man he underestimated, the old man he locked away, had outsmarted him completely. The truth is, revenge doesn't always need words. Sometimes, silence is the loudest punishment of all. When the plane landed, it felt like I had arrived on another planet. The air was warmer, the sunlight softer. No anger, no shouting, no invisible tension waiting behind closed doors. Just a quiet, open sky and the hum of a small seaside town that didn't know my name. The taxi ride from the airport followed a road lined with palm trees and pastel houses that looked like they'd been painted by calm hands. The driver was an older man, maybe my age, and he talked about fishing, the local market, and how the ocean air clears your soul. I smiled. He didn't know how right he was. The cottage I'd rented was small. 2 rooms, a porch that faced the water, and windows that let in the salty breeze. It wasn't much, but after what I'd lived through, it felt like a palace. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in my own house. Peace. I unpacked slowly, each motion deliberate. My wife's watch went on the bedside table, my passport and papers into the drawer. I boiled water for coffee and stood by the window as steam curled into the morning air. No shouting, no footsteps, just the rhythmic whisper of the waves. That night, I walked the beach. The sand was cool under my feet, the water reflecting the fading orange of the sunset. I sat down, breathing in deeply, letting the sound of the ocean wash away the last pieces of bitterness still clinging to me. Freedom doesn't always arrive with celebration. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like a whisper in the wind that says, "You've done enough. You can rest now." As I watched the waves roll in, I thought about Ethan, not with anger, but with distance. He was no longer my burden. He was a chapter closed, a lesson written in pain and inked with consequence. I had given him everything once. Now I had given him nothing, and somehow that felt fair. That night, as I fell asleep to the sound of the ocean outside my window, I realized something beautiful. Revenge may have brought me peace, but forgiveness brought me freedom. I didn't forgive him for his sake. I forgave him so I could finally start living again. In the beginning, my new life felt almost unreal, like I was walking through a dream I hadn't earned. The days were quiet, the kind of quiet that felt alive. I'd wake up to sunlight spilling across the wooden floor, the sound of seagulls calling from the distance, and the faint scent of salt drifting through the open windows. It was strange how peace could feel so heavy after years of chaos. I spent the first few weeks doing what I'd forgotten how to do. Nothing. No alarms, no lectures, no one telling me I was in the way. I took long walks by the shore, sometimes barefoot, feeling the cold sand between my toes. I'd sit on a weathered bench near the pier, sip coffee, and watch fishermen haul in their nets. They nodded at me, not out of pity or curiosity, but as if I'd always belonged there. It's funny how strangers can make you feel more at home than your own blood. One morning, I stopped by a small cafe run by a woman named Martha. She was kind in that simple, American way. No questions, no judgment. Just a smile and, "You look like someone who's been through enough." I laughed for the first time in months. She served me black coffee and a slice of pie that tasted like warmth itself. We didn't talk about the past. She didn't ask, and I didn't offer. That silence was its own kind of grace. Each day, the anger faded a little more. It didn't disappear. Anger never truly does, but it softened like a scar healing beneath the skin. I began fixing things around the cottage, planting small flowers outside, repainting the porch. Every nail, every stroke of paint felt like reclaiming something I'd lost long ago, purpose. At night, I'd sit outside under the stars, the ocean whispering just beyond the dunes. I no longer replayed the sound of the lock turning on that bathroom door. Instead, I thought about how far I'd come from that moment, from humiliation to peace. For years, I lived for my son. Then I lived through his cruelty. Now, for the first time, I was simply living for myself. And that, I realized, was the truest form of freedom there is. Peace has a strange way of testing you, right when you start to believe you've escaped your past. It comes knocking, softly at first, then louder. For weeks, I lived untouched by memory. My days followed a gentle rhythm. Morning coffee on the porch, fixing small things around the cottage, walking to the market where the locals greeted me by name. I began to think maybe my old life had finally loosened its grip. Then one afternoon it found me. I was sitting by the window, watching a storm rolling over the ocean, when my phone, the new one I bought under a different number, started buzzing. No name, just a U.S. area code I knew too well. For a moment, I just stared at it, the sound pulling me back to a life I'd already buried. 3 rings, 4, then silence. A minute later, it buzzed again, and again, dozens of missed calls, one after another. My chest tightened. I didn't need to see the name to know. Ethan. I set the phone down on the table and walked outside. The air smelled like rain and salt, heavy and alive. Each wave that hit the shore felt like a heartbeat, steady, calm, unstoppable. I breathed in, slowly. I wasn't that man anymore. The one who begged, who reasoned, who hoped. Inside, the phone stopped ringing. Then a message appeared. Just 6 words. Dad, please. I need to talk. I stared at it for a long time. I thought about the bathroom door, the sound of that lock turning. I thought about every small humiliation, every moment I was made to feel like a stranger in my own home. And then I thought about the ocean, how it never apologizes for pulling things away. I deleted the message. The next morning, another text came. Then another. I'm sorry. I lost everything. Please, just talk to me. But I didn't respond. Some conversations don't heal. They reopen wounds that were finally starting to close. I turned off the phone, set it in the drawer, and walked outside into the morning light. The waves were calm again, and for the first time, I didn't feel haunted. The past had found me, but it no longer owned me. A few weeks after those messages stopped coming, I found myself sitting at the small desk by the window, the ocean murmuring outside, like it was breathing for me. A soft wind pushed through the open shutters, fluttering the papers I'd left there. That's when I decided to do something I hadn't planned on. I picked up a pen and began writing a letter to my son. Not to send it, just to say what needed saying, to release the words I had swallowed for too many years. I started simple. Dear Ethan, you were 8 when your mother died. That was the day I promised myself I'd never let you feel alone. I worked until my hands cracked and my body gave out. I missed meals so you could eat. I went without so you could have more. My hand trembled as I wrote. Memories came back like waves, his first baseball game, his first broken tooth, the day I handed him the keys to the house. All those moments that once made me proud now carried the weight of betrayal. I thought love was enough. I thought raising you with sacrifice would make you kind. But maybe I made life too easy for you. Maybe I taught you comfort instead of character. Maybe I loved you so much, I forgot to let you struggle. The pen scratched slowly across the paper. I paused often, staring at the horizon beyond the glass. Seagulls drifted across the sky, unbothered, free. When you locked me in that bathroom, I didn't just lose faith in you. I lost a version of myself that believed blood was stronger than cruelty. I sat on that cold floor for 2 days and learned the hardest truth of my life. Sometimes love has an end for respect to begin. By the time I reached the end, the page was spotted with small drops, not of tears, but of peace. I don't hate you, Ethan. I hope one day you understand what you lost. I hope you become the kind of man your mother wanted you to be. But I can't go back. I found something better than forgiveness. I found freedom. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope, and wrote his name on the front. Then I set it in the drawer beside my bed, unsent, unread, but finished, because some words aren't meant to be delivered. They're meant to set you free. It was late one evening, just after sunset, when my phone lit up again. I hadn't heard that tone in weeks. The screen glowed softly in the dim cottage light. Ethan Miller. For a moment, I didn't move. I just stared at the name that used to mean everything to me. My son, my blood, my mistake. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Each vibration carried ghosts. The memory of cold tiles under my back, the sound of his laughter while I begged to be let out, the sting of realizing that love could turn cruel. My heart thudded slowly, steady but heavy. I knew why he was calling. The messages had stopped weeks ago, replaced now by this, a single desperate call made in the dark. I could picture him sitting somewhere small and broken, maybe alone in a rented apartment, his world stripped down to silence. Maybe he wanted forgiveness. Maybe he wanted help. Or maybe he just wanted to feel like someone still cared. But I couldn't answer, because the man who would have answered, the father who bent, who excused, who waited for kindness, was gone. I picked up the phone, not to talk, but to listen. His voice spilled out a voicemail after the 4th ring, shaky and raw. Dad, I don't know where to start. I messed up. I lost everything. Lena's gone. The house is gone. I don't even know who I am anymore. Please, just call me back. Please. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, trying not to break. Then the message ended with silence. I sat there for a long while, the phone heavy in my hand. The sea outside whispered softly against the shore, reminding me that life keeps moving, even when heart stays still. Finally, I placed the phone face down on the table and whispered, I already forgave you, son, just not in the way you wanted. I didn't press play again. I didn't save the voicemail. I deleted it, not out of anger, but acceptance, because answering that call would pull me back into a life I'd already escaped. Some closures don't come from conversations. They come from choosing silence. And in that silence, I found my peace. Time softens even the hardest edges. It doesn't erase pain. It just teaches you how to carry it differently. Months passed in my new life by the sea. The days melted into each other like watercolor. Blue skies, the steady rhythm of the waves, the scent of salt that never left my clothes. Slowly, the sharp memories of that locked bathroom began to fade, like an old bruise turning pale. I no longer woke up with bitterness in my chest. Instead, I woke up with gratitude. Gratitude for the quiet, for the simple mornings when sunlight spilled through the curtains, for coffee that stayed warm because no one was shouting in the background. Peace, I realize, isn't the absence of pain. It's the understanding that you don't have to relive it anymore. One afternoon, I walked along the shoreline, the wind brushing against my face. I watched families building sandcastles, kids laughing, parents shouting playfully over the waves. For a fleeting moment, I wonder if Ethan ever went to the beach, if he thought of me when he did, if he ever realized that love doesn't come with conditions or locks. But I didn't dwell. I couldn't. Holding on to that kind of thought is like holding your breath. You can only do it for so long before you suffocate. Instead, I whispered a quiet prayer into the wind, not for revenge this time, not for justice, but for release. Wherever you are, son, I said softly, I hope you learn what love really means. The waves carried the words away, scattering them across the horizon like secrets only the sea could keep. When I returned home, I opened the drawer beside my bed and found the unsent letter, the one I had written weeks ago. I unfolded it, read it one last time, and smiled. Then I walked outside and burned it in the small fire pit by the porch. The paper curled and blackened. The words turned to smoke that rose into the orange evening sky. And with that, the weight I had carried for years, guilt, anger, heartbreak, finally lifted. Not because I won, but because I let go. That's the thing about revenge. It may free you from others, but only forgiveness frees you from yourself. They say time changes people, but the truth is, time only reveals who we really are. When I look back now, at everything that happened, the sacrifices, the betrayal, the silence, the revenge, I don't see tragedy anymore. I see transformation. I came to the seaside town as a broken man, carrying ghosts that refuse to leave. I thought peace would come from taking back what was mine, from watching karma play its quiet hand. But I was wrong. Peace didn't come from revenge. It came from reclaiming myself, the part of me that existed before anger, before pride, before pain. These days, I wake early and watch the sunrise from my porch. The ocean glows gold for a few brief minutes, as if the world forgives itself every morning. Sometimes I think that's what healing really is. Forgiving the world for being cruel, and forgiving yourself for surviving it. I've learned that love isn't always rewarded. That blood doesn't always mean loyalty. And that family, no matter how close, can sometimes be the hardest wound to heal. But I've also learned something greater, that the end of one story doesn't mean the end of your life. It means the beginning of the one you write for yourself. Every person who's been hurt, betrayed, or made to feel small, I want them to know this. You are not what they did to you. You are what you become after you rise from it. If you ever find yourself standing where I once stood, alone, unwanted, forgotten, don't chase the people who hurt you. Don't beg them to see your worth. Just walk away. Quietly. Completely. Because sometimes walking away isn't weakness. It's wisdom. Ethan taught me that cruelty can live where love once did. But life taught me that freedom begins where fear ends. Now, when I take my evening walks by the shore, I no longer carry the weight of the past. I don't hate my son. I don't love him the same way either. I simply wish him peace. The same peace I had to lose everything to find. I am no longer the man who was locked behind a door. I am the man who walked through it and never looked back.